Always true.
I'm James Bays at the United Nations in New York, where the war on Gaza is dominating the agenda of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly, and where Europe's stance is shifting as countries like France and the United Kingdom move to recognise a Palestinian state. It is a historic moment, and simultaneously in the Netherlands, long seen as a guardian of international law, the coalition government has collapsed after Geert Wilders quit over its asylum and immigration policy, while the resignation of Foreign Minister Casper Veldkamp after partners refused to impose tougher sanctions on Israel has exposed the fault lines tearing apart Dutch politics. Caught between Europe's shifting stance abroad and a failed coalition at home, there will now be new elections. Dick Schoof, the outgoing leader of the Netherlands, talks to Al Jazeera. Dick Schoof, Prime Minister of the Netherlands, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. You are, in many ways, very different from lots of the political leaders that we have on this programme, because many spent their entire life as politicians fighting for power. You didn't. You were a senior civil servant who came in as an independent figure to lead a coalition when they needed someone to lead it. Does that give you a different perspective, do you think?
Well, I think yes. Because as a non-partisan and not running in any campaign, I think I can build bridges. And I think also in the Dutch politics that's always necessary.
Were you expecting to be Prime Minister?
No,
are you the unlikely Prime Minister?
I think I was the unlikely, absolutely. And I didn't expect it. I never tried for it. And actually was very happy being a Secretary General of the Ministry of Security and Justice at that time. But I got a call from one of the party leaders we have a coalition government from 4 parties. And they asked me to become Prime Minister for the 4 party leaders and for the 4 parties. So it was a disturbing evening when they called me. Yes, absolutely.
In the Netherlands, of course, governments are formed by coalitions that sometimes take very, very many months to form. Did you have any qualms about taking the job, particularly as the government you ended up leading, many have described as the most right-wing government in Dutch history? Yeah,
well, of course it did cross my mind. But because we have coalition governments, there is always a kind of document that states what the basics of the government are. And
sort of manifesto.
Kind of manifesto.
Yeah.
So I looked at the manifesto, and not about the individual points of the parties. And the manifesto was okay, in my respect. So I could fully underline and inscribe the manifesto, and that's why I became a Prime Minister.
You've been in the job for 14 months, but in the last few months you are only the caretaker Prime Minister because the largest party in the coalition, the one led by, people may have heard of him, Geert Wilders, the anti-Islam populist, they pulled out of the government. So where's your legitimacy, and are you in office but not in power?
That's an interesting question. I think I'm still absolutely in office, that's for sure. And power is now to be overcome in Parliament, because currently there are only 2 parties supporting the caretaker government. It is absolute minority. So we have to look for majorities in the Parliament every time for every big decision. And the Parliament still gave trust to the government. And we can work on big issues, we can work. And specifically in national domain, I also asked the Parliament to have mandate for the international, because there's so much going on, whether it relates to trade and security, and I still can't mandate.
So you are independent as Prime Minister. You are not standing again for office, although someone might ask you to be Prime Minister. It seems pretty unlikely. I'm hoping you have a free rein in this interview to be very frank with us about the state of the world. And I'd like to start with Gaza, because it is the most awful situation, as you know. An independent commission of inquiry recently, set up by the UN Human Rights Council, concluded Israel was committing genocide. Do you agree with that?
No.
Why not?
We had also a lengthy debate in Parliament last week, in particular about this report. We see the risk of genocide, and we act upon that risk as a Dutch government. But genocide is going to be decided by the International Court of Justice. What actually also this UN commission clearly stated in the document. At the same time, when you read the document, I mean, it's awful what's happening in Gaza. You feel silent when you read it because it's absolutely horrifying and catastrophic what's going on in Gaza.
You say it's for the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the UN, to decide, which is based in your country. We'll come back to that later. But you know, because you worked in the law field, that international law is glacially slow. There's a case about Myanmar. It was started in 2019. They still haven't decided it yet. And the problem in this case is not just a dry legal subject. This is ongoing every single day. There are multiple people killed, and we know who's killing them, and there includes women and children. We know they are killed by Israel. In any other conflict, any day you'd call a massacre. A massacre every single day for nearly 2 years. Do you not have to say something more about this genocide issue? Even if a court cannot say it's genocide, does it begin to you, looking at this, the scale of it, does it look like genocide?
Well, let's first state that genocide is a very specific word, and that's also why it's so important that it's going to be decided by a court decision. At the same time, what's happening in Gaza is terrible. And some say it started with the Hamas attack almost 2 years ago, with 1,200 deaths and a lot of people abducted. But of course, it has a longer history. But still, I mean, the massacre by Hamas was terrible. And what's now going on in Gaza is terrible as well. And we are every day in our contact with the Israeli government, also with the Palestinian Authority, in the international world, we are striving also in the EU for more pressure on the government of Netanyahu to change course and to make sure that there's going to be a ceasefire, that the hostages are being released, that the humanitarian situation in Gaza has to be made better, and that the humanitarian aid has to reach the people in Gaza, because the people in Gaza are suffering. But at the same time, Hamas is an essential threat for Israel.
Now, we mentioned earlier on that your main coalition party had pulled out. You had another party pull out recently, which included your foreign minister, Casper Veldkamp. He said he wanted tougher sanctions on Israel. Isn't he right on that?
Well, we as a government, we are acting for, especially in the EU, and Casper Veldkamp made the first move to talk about the so-called associated treaty with Israel and the EU. And many people were surprised that the Netherlands asked for a decision in Europe by the European Commission to take steps on this association treaty related to Horizon, which goes about scientific and innovation, but also on trade. So the Dutch did make a step on that. And we also gave a persona non grata for 2 Israeli ministers. We are now looking into the products from illegal settlements to get a ban on it. So we're working on different levels, and especially within the EU, to make sure that the pressure on the government of Netanyahu is getting higher and higher.
Do you think there's a chance the EU might take action? Because the EU is, it seems to me, pretty divided on this.
It's divided, but it's changing. And I think together we create bigger pressure than just alone. And that's the main reason why we always, and also in Parliament, debate on this and are saying it has to be international. Although when it's related to the products of illegal settlements, we are now also looking into national measures. And the persona non grata on the 2 Israel ministers was also a national decision.
OK, well, I want to see if there's going to be any further national decisions. But let me just, as I've said already, remind viewers that your country prides itself for its role in international justice. The Hague is the seat, both of the International Court of Justice we've mentioned, which is the highest court in the UN system, and also the International Court of Justice. Let's start with the International Court of Justice. It has already come up with provisional measures last year, in January, March and May, told Israel not to do anything that could amount to genocide, said there should be unimpeded delivery of aid, and told Israel to stop the Rafah operation. Well, Israel hasn't done any of that. The Rafah operation's long gone, and now they're in the middle of the biggest place in Gaza, with more than 1 million people, Gaza City. Israel keeps defying that court. You keep saying rely on the court, but they're defying that court. Should you not take tougher sanctions because of that?
Well, we condemn the Israeli action, as you just...
Words.
Yeah, and at the same time, as we just discussed, we took a lot of measures, and also because of the risk of genocide, and that's why we were acting. And I think with everything we do, we put pressure on Israel, on the government of Netanyahu, because we don't deny the catastrophic situation in Gaza. I mean, that's very important. I mean, we feel the pain, you might say, of the people of Gaza. But it's important that we put pressure, we put international pressure, and we can argue about the result. But then, again, we can argue about every pressure that is put on the government of Netanyahu, because apparently they don't listen to anybody.
They're not listening. You have already said quite clearly what you have done, which is barring two far-right ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, from entering the Netherlands. But it's not them who are giving the orders. It's Netanyahu who's giving the orders. And let me come back to those courts that are sitting in your country. The International Criminal Court has put an arrest warrant on Netanyahu himself. And since that happened in November last year, thousands more have died. Why not sanction him?
Well, we were very clear that the arrest warrant, I mean, we are a member of the ICC. So whenever he will travel and when he will come to the Netherlands, he's going to be arrested for the ICC.
But further sanctions on him, you could put further sanctions on him.
Yeah, but an arrest warrant, I think, is even bigger than any sanction you could take. So we sanctioned those two ministers because they, in their words, they are so extreme that we thought it was necessary to take these measures. And related to Netanyahu, there is an arrest warrant from the ICC. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that can be addressed to somebody. And the pressure on him is already there.
As you know, famine has been declared. It's a very cautious system that determines whether it's famine, and it's finally said there is famine taking place in Gaza. The UN says it's a man-made famine. That, I'm afraid, means it's an Israeli-made famine in Gaza. Your country, I think it's worth reminding people, even within living memory, has knowledge of famine. At the end of World War II, you had a famine caused by conflict in your country. Does this, what's happening in Gaza, have particular resonance in the Netherlands?
Well, a lot of people have a lot of worry about, especially the famine. We also got big demonstrations in the Netherlands with more than 100,000 people. And I think that one of the main reasons why we put pressure on Netanyahu government is because of the total lack of humanitarian aid in Gaza, and we want that aid to be there. We were involved in air droppings for a shorter period. We are talking with the neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan, also to see how the land routes can be taken up again, so that all the help, also from the UN, can go into Gaza again. I think that's one of the first priorities. We always say there are three priorities in relation to ceasefire. And one is release the hostages, and the second is the ceasefire for the two-state solution. And the third, but the order can be different, is aid to Gaza.
Now, another issue, of course, a related issue, is whether to recognise the state of Palestine. We've got to the position now, after this high-level week that's been taking place in New York, that 15 out of the 27 EU states recognise Palestine. The Netherlands is not one of them. Why not?
That's right. We signed a declaration, the New York Declaration, that was also issued this week. I think that was an important step also for the Netherlands, because it clearly defines that we are into this two-state solution. And also, what I think was important is that in that statement is also very clear that Hamas cannot play a role into the future of Gaza.
But why not recognise the state of Palestine? You agree with the two-state solution. Yep. You recognised Israel decades ago. Why not recognise Palestine and put it on a proper two-state footing? Yeah,
well, in the end, I mean, when you want a two-state solution, you're going to recognise Palestine, because otherwise there are no two states. So in the end, there has to be a safe and secure Israel and a safe and secure Palestine.
Why
at this time, we think, and also my Minister of Foreign Affairs, David van Wil, stated it very clearly on Monday, at this time we think not the time yet. It has to be part of the political process, and in this political process, someday we will recognise Palestine if there is a clear view of a two-state solution.
Are you worried, given the recognitions that have taken place in New York during the UN General Assembly High-Level Week, that there'll be an Israeli response? there's a lot of talk that Netanyahu might annex the entire West Bank, which under international law is occupied territory. How worried are you about that, and what should be the international response if he does it?
Well, it would be absolutely the wrong decision by Netanyahu, because that will block the whole idea of a two-state solution. So that's certainly not the path he should go, in our opinion. But he's been against it.
I mean, this is the thing. I in my previous job as UN correspondent for Al Jazeera, sat and listened to the monthly briefing to ambassadors every single month for more than a decade. And it was clear Israel has been blocking a two-state solution for years and years and years. He doesn't believe in a two-state solution. You don't have a partner in that. You haven't for years.
Well, I think we have a lot of partners in that, and it was stated last Monday here in New York. So the international pressure and the whole international idea is still for the two-state solution, and we have to work on that. Whether Israel likes it or not, we have to continue on that path.
Let me pivot to one of the other huge international issues. 3.5 years now of Russia's war with Ukraine, and shock here in New York this week when we've had, it seems, a complete U-turn from the US government and by President Trump. On his Truth Social platform, he wrote, "After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form, perhaps even including Crimea." First, were you surprised by that? Secondly, do you support that position?
I think it was a surprising announcement. Within the coalition, the willing, which are a lot of member states, not really member states, but a lot of countries, Europe, but also other countries like Japan, New Zealand, Australia, we are working on a ceasefire and security guarantees for Ukraine so that the real negotiations can start. And we have a lot of talks also with the Trump administration and also with President Trump. There was always a clear sign from the Trump administration that they would still support the security guarantees by the coalition of the willing. At the same time, there were different soundings from the Trump administration how far they would go. And we always said it needs support for Ukraine, but pressure on Russia. And the pressure on Russia was still lacking. And I hope that this announcement is going to, in the end, put more pressure on Russia, for example, through sanctions. The European Union is now taking up its 19th sanction package. And if the US is going to support by their own sanction package, I think that would put really pressure on Russia. That would bring them to the negotiation table, and together with security guarantees from the coalition of the willing, then President Zelensky, on his own terms, can discuss the ceasefire and, in the end, a lasting peace.
Have you been disturbed before this U-turn about sometimes the way this has been going? There was a summit in Alaska, as you know, between President Trump and President Putin last month. Quite literally, Trump rolled out the red carpet for Russia. And just to recall that in 2014, flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. 298 people were killed. 196 of them were Dutch nationals. Not just the Netherlands, but recently the European Court of Human Rights concluded Russia was responsible. When you saw Putin being given red carpet treatment, did that make you uncomfortable to see those pictures?
Well, at the time of the MH17, I was, as a civil servant, responsible for the whole aftermath of MH17, together with the then Prime Minister Mark Rutte, now the Secretary General of NATO. So the MH17 is very close to my heart. And not only because I'm Dutch, because I was so involved in that process together with Mark Rutte. So seeing and looking at Russia in relation to Ukraine certainly gives it an extra dimension. At the same time, I mean, politics is always what we call realpolitik. You have to deal with everybody. And I think after Alaska, the European leaders went to Washington to speak with Trump, and we had a good preparation in Europe about this meeting, and that ended up pretty well. Afterwards, I think 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting of the Coalition of Willing in Paris, and had a long phone call with President Trump. And then again, it was clear that we would look for ways to get America on board in relation to the sanction of the security guarantees. And I think that's the position we want America to have, but also put pressure on Russia. So I really hope that this, through social posting, leads to bigger pressure on Russia and actual help for Ukraine, because the fighting is still going on every day.
In recent weeks, and it may be a coincidence, but it's been in the run-up to this high-level week in New York, there have been a number of incidents where Russia has violated NATO airspace, according to NATO allies. Poland, Estonia and Finland have reported violations by drones and by jets. Now President Trump has said that NATO nations should shoot down Russian jets. In the Poland incident, your own F-35s were deployed. Would you give the order to shoot down Russian jets?
That's a risk they're taking.
But would you give the order? Because,
well,
I mean, the consequences could be catastrophic. I mean, there's a lot at stake. Yeah. Potentially a third world war, a nuclear war.
Absolutely, and Putin must realize that he is taking that risk, and that it's reckless what he is doing. And it was also the comment, also by NATO, and also by myself actually, but also a lot of European leaders, that's really reckless to enter NATO airspace, because that's totally different than what he's doing and what we condemn as well, the aggression war in Ukraine. But entering NATO airspace, we have all kinds of NATO instructions and NATO workarounds how to deal with that, and that is in place, and Putin should realize that.
So would you give the order?
Putin should realize that he's taking the risk.
Okay. In terms of the NATO summit, and you were the host of the NATO summit that took place in The Hague at the end of June, NATO trumpeted, and I think wanted Russia and particularly President Trump to be aware, that you'd increased your defence budgets to 5% of GDP. You kept Trump happy, but you look at the details. 32 NATO countries signed up. Some of them are never going to get there. Spain's made it quite clear it's never going to get there. And a lot of this money that is classed as military expenditure is actually just infrastructure that would have been spent anyway. All a game of smoke and mirrors, wasn't it?
No. I think it was a clear signal, but also actually money that we have to deliver in the coming years. I mean, when we look at the decision-making process in the Netherlands, we take it very seriously, and we want to end up at this 5%. And the infrastructure needs, for example, absolute for the military equipment to go from west to the east. It has to change. I mean, we have to do something about that. But the main spending will be about military equipment, keeping up with Russia. I mean, they got a total war economy. They spend so much money, and they have so many equipment. We have to catch up as NATO. That's why this 3.5%, 1.5%, in the end 5% is so important in 2035. We take it seriously, and I think NATO will address all the countries. Also, those countries who maybe are a little bit reluctant, but they signed up, and we have to step up until on this 5% to make sure that we can get our resilience in place and can fight back if necessary.
If we look at domestic political issues in the Netherlands, there's one that's a domestic top political issue across Europe and across the US. In his speech at the General Assembly, President Trump said it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. Migration is an issue you deal with now. It's the issue ultimately that collapsed your coalition. It's an issue that you've dealt with in the past in your job. What is the right approach for the Netherlands and Europe on this very difficult issue?
Well, I think it has to be a European decision. Because in Europe we almost don't have any internal borders, as you're well aware. So we have to take care of our outer borders. At the same time, we have to take care of those who really need, as a refugee, protection. We should give it to them. But in Europe, we see too many people coming into Europe, not being a so-called real refugee. I mean, it's difficult to state, but and I think we should make the influx. It should go down, absolutely, no question about it. At the same time, give protection. The best way to do it is to make sure that you give the protection outside Europe and then let them in. And then, of course, we probably need in Europe as well labor and also external labor. And then we can define migration along the question what we really need. And then I think we can manage in Europe. And that's a very specific topic. We deal with it almost every day. It's high on the agenda of the people of the Netherlands. It's high on the agenda of the people of Europe. And in particular, together with the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Prime Minister of Italy, the three of us work very closely with the European Union to put more measures in place to stop the influx and to make sure that we get the right labor in, and those who really need protection get protection in Europe.
And it becomes a very toxic subject as well, doesn't it? I mean, we saw a very big demonstration in the UK in London recently. We saw rioting in The Hague, which again, they were talking about migration as the reason for carrying that out. The problem, I mean, in the Netherlands, you have a acute housing shortage as well, which I think plays into this. But the problem is some on the far right mix migration and start bringing in racism. Is that not fair? There are racist overtones to this, which surely have no place in a modern, multicultural, multi-ethnic society like the Netherlands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for racism is no place in the Netherlands, and as a cabinet and a government, we are always very clear on that. And at the same time...
But it gets mixed in this migration issue repeatedly, doesn't it? That's the trouble.
I mean, people combine it all the way, and sometimes it gets into politics. But I think we have to be very careful. And also in the current debate in the Netherlands, people are careful. And at the same time, people see what they see. And you cannot deny what you see. But we have to be very careful, because for racism, there's no place. For discrimination, there's no place. I mean, that has to be, I mean, if government cannot take that position, and people in the Netherlands don't take that position, I mean, we got really in trouble.
Let's look briefly at the end at the state of the world, because the global institutions were mainly built 80 years ago. It's 80th birthday of the UN this year. That was World War II.
Yeah.
Your country, very good moment for your country, coming out, liberation from occupation by Nazi Germany. Is the world that was built then fit for purpose? And let me give you a specific example. The centerpiece, signed in San Francisco, is the UN Charter. Yet recent instances, Russia invading Ukraine, the US and Israel attacking Iran, Israel attacking Qatar. People are taking no notice even of the most basic rules in the UN Charter, are they?
I think the Charter is still very important. And I think that multilateralism in our case, from the Netherlands, is not that. It has to be alive. And we have to find ways in which we can, if some people think it's dead, how we can at least make it alive again. And I think the reforms are a first step that the Secretary General of the UN announced, but I think more has to be done to make really sure that the countries that are members of the United Nations get the trust in the United Nations to play their role, especially when it relates to security and peace.
But you, from your background as a civil servant who's made organisations work, who's been a bureaucrat and seen how things fit together, I mean, do you think a major revamp is now needed of an overhaul of the international system?
I think it would certainly give a signal to all the workers working in the United Nations, but at the same time, it depends on the politicians, about the world leaders. I mean, they can make a difference. It's not about the bureaucracy that's going to make a difference. It's other leaders themselves that are going to make a difference.
Dick Schoof, Prime Minister of the Netherlands, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.